Sometimes the smallest gestures happen when we think no one is watching. A crooked letter here, a fallen sign there. Most people walk past these tiny imperfections without a second glance. But what happens when someone who notices everything is quietly observing someone who fixes everything? Sarah Chun had perfected the art of being invisible. At 17, she'd learned that keeping her head down and her voice quiet was the safest way to navigate the world. Which is why, on that ordinary Tuesday afternoon at Westfield Shopping Center, she never imagined at straightening a loose S on the Barnes & Noble storefront would set her life on an entirely different path. The man in the expensive suit had been watching her for 3 whole minutes. Not in a creepy way, in a curious way. He'd seen hundreds of teenagers walk past that crooked sign over the past week. Store employees had walked past it. Security guards had walked past it. Even the store manager had walked past it twice that morning. But this quiet girl with paint-stained fingers had stopped, looked around to make sure no one was watching, and carefully pressed the loose letter back into place. She'd stepped back, checked her work, and nodded to herself with the kind of satisfaction that comes from making something right. What Sarah didn't know was that the man watching her wasn't just any observer. He was Robert Harrison, and he'd built his entire fortune on noticing what others missed. 40 years ago, he'd started with a single failing bookstore and turned it into the largest mall empire on the East Coast. He'd learned to spot potential in the most unlikely places. Robert had been making his weekly rounds through the mall when he'd noticed the sign. It had been bothering him for days, but he'd been curious to see if anyone else would notice it. Store managers were too busy with sales figures. Maintenance crews followed work orders. Shoppers were focused on their destinations. But this teenager had seen what everyone else ignored. She hadn't just noticed it, she'd cared enough to fix it without being asked, without expecting recognition, without even knowing if anyone would. Appreciate the gesture. Sarah brushed her hands on her jeans and adjusted her backpack. She had 20 minutes before her shift at Murphy's Frame Shop, where she worked part-time to help her grandmother with expenses. The mall was her usual shortcut from school, a path she'd taken hundreds of times. But today felt different somehow. Though she couldn't explain why. As she walked toward the food court, she felt eyes on her. She glanced around nervously, a habit born from years of trying to avoid attention. The feeling persisted, but she saw nothing unusual, just the typical afternoon crowd of shoppers, workers and teenagers killing time. Robert Harrison followed at a distance, his mind racing. In his 4 decades of business, he'd learned to trust his instincts about people. Something about this girl's quiet competence reminded him of himself at that age, before he'd learned to speak up, before he'd built his empire, when he was just a kid who noticed things that others missed. He made a decision that would change both their lives. Tomorrow, he would find a way to talk to her, not as the owner of everything she was standing in, but as someone who recognized a kindred spirit, someone who understood that the smallest gestures often reveal the biggest truths about character. Crooked Barnes & Noble sign hung straight now, a small perfection in an imperfect world. And for the first time in months, Robert Harrison smiled genuinely, remembering what it felt like to believe in the power of noticing. Robert Harrison kept a faded photograph in his wallet, tucked behind his driver's license, where most people wouldn't notice it. The black and white image showed a young man with hopeful eyes standing in front of a tiny storefront, his hand resting proudly on a door that read Harrison's Books. The store was failing even then, though the 25-year-old in the photo didn't know it yet. That photograph had become his North Star, a reminder of where he'd started and why details mattered. Back then, he'd been the one fixing crooked signs, sweeping sidewalks that weren't his responsibility, and staying late to arrange displays that 3 customers might see. Every small improvement had been an act of faith in a future that seemed impossible. The bookstore had lasted 8 months. Not because Robert didn't work hard. He'd worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week. It failed because he'd chosen the wrong location, underestimated his competition, and overestimated his understanding of retail. But in those 8 months, he'd learned something invaluable. Success wasn't about having the right answers immediately. It was about paying attention to the details that others ignored. After the bookstore closed, Robert had taken a job as a maintenance worker at a small shopping center. While other employees rushed through their tasks, he'd observed, he'd watched, customer patterns, noted which stores thrived and which struggled. And most importantly, he'd seen how small environmental factors affected shopping behavior. A burnt-out light bulb could redirect foot traffic. A crooked sign could make a store appear unprofessional. A clean, well-organized space invited lingering. A cluttered one encouraged quick exits. Within 2 years, he'd convinced the mall's owner to let him manage the property. Within 5, he'd bought it. Within 10, he'd purchased 3 more. Each acquisition had been built on his ability to see what others missed and fix what others ignored. Now, 40 years later, Robert owned 47 shopping centers across 6 states. His net worth was measured in hundreds of millions, but the photograph in his wallet reminded him that empire building began with caring about details that seemed too small to matter. That's why watching Sarah fix the Barnes and Noble sign had struck him so powerfully. In her simple gesture, he'd recognized the same instinct that had driven his entire career. She'd seen disorder and restored order, not because someone had asked her to, but because chaos bothered her. That kind of natural attention to detail couldn't be taught. It was either present or absent. Robert had been thinking about legacy lately. He was 73, healthy, but aware that his time was finite. His children had pursued other careers, showing little interest in the family business. His executive team was competent, but lacked vision. They could maintain what he'd built, but they couldn't innovate or expand it. He'd been searching for someone who shared his fundamental philosophy. That success was built on noticing what others missed and caring enough to fix it. Someone who understood that small improvements compound into major transformations. Someone who could see potential where others saw only problems. Standing in his mall, watching a teenager straighten a sign that dozens of adults had ignored, Robert felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Excitement about the future. Not the excitement of acquiring another property or negotiating another deal, but the deeper satisfaction of recognizing raw talent and wondering what it might become with proper cultivation. The girl was walking away now, disappearing into the crowd of shoppers. But Robert had already decided. Tomorrow he would find her again, and this time he would introduce himself. Sarah's worn art supply box sat on her desk like a treasure chest, its dented metal surface scarred from years of faithful service. Inside, every pencil, brush, and tube of paint had its designated place, organized with the same meticulous care she'd shown the Barnes and Noble sign. The box had been her father's once, before the accident that had left her in her grandmother's care 8 years ago. Her bedroom walls told the story of a girl who noticed everything. Sketches covered every available surface architectural details, from downtown buildings, leaf patterns from the park, the way light fell across her grandmother's face during their evening tea. Most were quick studies, capturing moments that others would forget, but each one revealed an eye trained to see beauty in the ordinary. At school, Sarah existed in the comfortable shadows. She sat in the middle rows, turned in assignments punctually, and spoke only when directly addressed. Teachers appreciated her reliability, but rarely remembered her name. Classmates knew her as the quiet girl who's good at art, which was exactly how she preferred it. Visibility meant vulnerability, and Sarah had learned early that staying unnoticed was safer than standing out. But invisibility had its advantages. From her position on the periphery, Sarah observed everything. She knew which hallways had the best natural light, which water fountains worked properly, and which bathroom stalls had doors that actually locked. She noticed when the custodian looked tired, when the librarian got a new haircut, and when the cafeteria workers were short-staffed. Her sketchbook contained dozens of small improvements that could make the school more functional and beautiful. Ideas she'd never shared with anyone. Her part-time job at Murphy's frame shop had become her sanctuary. Mr. Murphy, a gruff man in his 60s, had initially hired her to help with inventory and cleanup, but he'd quickly discovered that Sarah had an intuitive understanding of composition and color. She could look at a customer's artwork and immediately suggest the perfect frame and matte combination. Her recommendations increased sales, though. Mr. Murphy rarely acknowledged her contributions directly. The job paid minimum wage, but every dollar mattered. Sarah's grandmother, Elena, worked as a seamstress from their small apartment, taking in alterations and repairs to supplement her. Social Security income. Medical bills from Elena's diabetes medication consumed most of their budget, leaving little for extras. Sarah's art supplies came from birthday money, saved over months in clearance sales at the craft store. Despite their financial struggles, Elena had always encouraged Sarah's artistic pursuits. "You see things differently, Mia," she would say, watching Sarah sketch by the window. "That's a gift, not a burden." Elena had been the one to suggest that Sarah take the mall route home from school, knowing that her granddaughter found inspiration in the urban landscape. Sarah's sketchbook contained dozens of drawings from her daily mall walks. The geometric patterns in the tile work, the way escalators created diagonal lines against vertical storefronts, the interplay of artificial and natural light from the skylights. She'd even sketched the Barnes and Noble signs several times, noting how the inconsistent letter spacing disrupted the overall aesthetic. Yesterday's fix had been inevitable. She simply couldn't walk past disorder without addressing it. Her teachers had mentioned college, but Sarah kept those conversations brief. College required money they didn't have and dreams that seemed too large for their small apartment. Better to focus on the present, on the small improvements she could make today, on the quiet satisfaction of making her immediate world a little more beautiful. The art supply box closed with a soft click, its contents secure until tomorrow's inspiration struck. Robert Harrison's business card was a study in understated elegance. Heavy cream cardstock, simple black lettering, no fancy logos or unnecessary flourishes. Just his name and Harrison Properties in a clean, professional font. He'd spent considerable time perfecting that design, understanding that first impressions mattered, and that confidence was often communicated through restraint. He'd been carrying the card in his jacket pocket for 3 days, waiting for the right moment to approach the girl who'd fixed his sign. Robert had made discreet inquiries and learned that she worked at Murphy's frame shop and typically walked through the mall around 3:30 p.m. on her way home from school. Today, he positioned himself near the Barnes and Noble entrance, the scene of their first unspoken interaction. When Sarah appeared, walking with her characteristic quiet purpose, Robert felt an unexpected flutter of nervousness. He'd negotiated billion-dollar deals with Fortune 500 executives, but approaching a teenager required a different kind of courage. He couldn't rely on his reputation or business acumen. He needed to connect with her as a person, not as a powerful stranger. "Excuse me," he said as she passed, his voice gentle but confident. "I wanted to thank you for fixing our sign yesterday." Sarah stopped abruptly, her eyes widening with surprise and a hint of alarm. She glanced around as if looking for an escape route, then back at Robert with the wary expression of someone unaccustomed to being noticed. I didn't think anyone saw that," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I noticed things," Robert replied with a slight smile. "It's an occupational hazard. You did excellent work. The sign looks perfect now." Sarah's posture remained tense, but curiosity flickered in her eyes. "You're not in trouble, are you? I mean, I didn't ask permission or anything." "On the contrary," Robert said, "I'm impressed. Most people would walk right past a problem like that. You saw it and fixed it. That shows initiative and attention to detail." He paused, studying her paint-stained fingers and the well-worn messenger bag slung across her shoulder. "I'm Robert Harrison. I own the properties here, including this mall, and I'd like to ask you something." Sarah's expression shifted from wariness to confusion. "You own the mall?" "I do, which is why I'm particularly interested in people who care about how it looks and functions." Robert pulled out his business card, extending it toward her. "I have a proposition for you. Nothing complicated or time-consuming, just a small project that matches your obvious talents." Sarah took the card with trembling fingers, studying it as if it might contain hidden messages. "What kind of project would you be interested in?" "Helping me identify visual problems throughout the mall, things that need fixing or improving." "I'd pay you for your time, of course." The question hung in the air between them. Robert could see Sarah's mind working, processing the unexpected opportunity while wrestling with her natural caution. "I don't understand," she said finally. "Why me? I'm just a high school student. I don't have any training or experience." "You have something more valuable than training," Robert replied. "You have instincts. You notice things that others miss, and you care enough to fix them. That's exactly what I need." Sarah looked down at the business card again, then back at, "Robert, can I think about it?" "Of course. Take all the time you need. My number's on the card." As Sarah walked away, Robert felt the same anticipation he'd experienced 40 years ago when he'd first imagined transforming a failing bookstore into something greater. The vintage Polaroid camera felt substantial in Sarah's hands, its weight suggesting both importance and responsibility. Robert had presented it to her with the reverence of someone passing down a family heirloom, explaining that it had belonged to his mentor, a man who taught him that instant photographs captured truth in a way that digital images somehow missed. "I want you to document every visual problem you can find," Robert had said during their meeting the next day. "Don't worry about solutions, yet just identify what's wrong. A crooked sign, poor lighting, cluttered displays, anything that disrupts the visual harmony of the space." Sarah had called him the previous evening, her voice tentative but determined. "I'd like to try your project, Mr. Harrison, if you're still interested." Now, 3 days later, she stood in the mall's main corridor with her new camera, feeling simultaneously empowered and overwhelmed. The Polaroid's mechanical clicks and whirs seemed loud in the busy space, but Robert had assured her that documenting problems was her job now, not something to hide. "Start wherever you feel drawn," he'd suggested. "Trust your instincts. If something bothers you visually, photograph it. We'll discuss your findings next week." Sarah began near the food court, where she'd always noticed that the overhead menu boards were inconsistently formatted. Some restaurants used bold fonts, others used script, and several had different color schemes that created visual chaos. Through the camera's viewfinder, the disorder became even more apparent. Dot, click, flash. The instant photograph emerged from the camera like a rectangular tongue, slowly developing into a perfect capture of the visual confusion. Moving through the mall, Sarah discovered that her new assignment transformed her familiar walking route into a treasure hunt. She photographed burned-out bulbs in the jewelry store's display case, a water stain on the ceiling near the bookstore, and a directory sign with peeling letters that she'd somehow never noticed before. The camera became her confidence booster. When store employees looked at her curiously, she could gesture to it and explain she was documenting issues for management. The simple prop legitimized her presence and gave her permission to look closely at things she'd only glimpsed before. A department store entrance. She discovered a fascinating problem. The escalator handrails were slightly different heights, creating a subtle but noticeable visual imbalance. Through the Polaroid's lens, the asymmetry became glaringly obvious. How had she never seen this before? By the end of her first week, Sarah had filled a shoebox with instant photographs. Each image told a story of small imperfections that collectively diminished the mall's overall aesthetic. But more importantly, each photograph represented a moment when she'd trusted her instincts and documented what others had overlooked. The project awakened something in Sarah that had been dormant since childhood, a sense of purpose beyond mere observation. She wasn't just noticing problems anymore. She was becoming their chronicler, their advocate. For the first time in her life, her attention to detail felt like a superpower rather than a quirk. Robert had been right about trusting her instincts. The camera had simply given her permission to act on them. As she walked home each evening, her messenger bag heavy with the day's photographic discoveries, Sarah found herself looking forward to tomorrow's hunt. The mall was full of secrets, and she was finally qualified to find them. Sarah's spiral-bound notebook had become her most treasured possession, its pages filled with detailed sketches and observations that revealed the analytical mind behind her quiet exterior. Each page contained not just problems, but potential solutions, drawn with the precision of someone who understood that form and function were inseparable. The notebook opened to a page titled "Food Court Lighting Analysis" in Sarah's careful handwriting. Below, she'd sketched the current fluorescent setup with notes about harsh shadows and glare, then drawn her proposed solution, a combination of pendant lights and recessed fixtures that would create warmer, more inviting illumination. The technical details were surprisingly sophisticated for a high school student with no formal training. "This is remarkable work," Robert said as they sat in his office, the notebook spread between them on his mahogany desk. "You've identified problems that our professional consultants missed." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I just draw what I see, and then I think about how it could be better." "That's exactly the skill we need," Robert replied, turning to a page labeled Wayfinding Issues. Sarah had documented how the mall's current signage created confusion, with arrows pointing in conflicting directions and store names that were difficult to read from various angles. Her proposed solution involved a color-coded system with clear sight lines and consistent typography. "Where did you learn about design principles?" Robert asked. "I didn't really learn them anywhere," Sarah admitted. I notice when things feel wrong, and then I try to figure out why." This was the key insight that separated Sarah from other observant people. She didn't just notice problems. She instinctively understood their causes and could envision solutions. Her notebook contained dozens of examples: a sketch showing how relocating a trash can would improve foot traffic flow, a drawing demonstrating how different tile patterns could guide shoppers toward specific stores, a detailed analysis of how natural light from the skylights could be better utilized. Other mall employees had begun to notice her presence. Security guards nodded when she passed. Store managers smiled and asked about her project. The maintenance crew had started approaching her with questions about problem areas they'd been trying to fix. Sarah's nervous energy was transforming into quiet confidence as she realized that her observations had value. "I have a confession," Robert said, closing the notebook. "I've been implementing some of your suggestions without telling you." Sarah's eyes widened. "You have?" "The lighting change in the west corridor, the new directory design near the main entrance, the repositioned seating area by the fountain hall. Your ideas, and they're working beautifully. Customer feedback has been overwhelmingly positive." Sarah stared at him, processing the information. Her ideas weren't just theoretical exercises. They were actual improvements that real people appreciated. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "Because I wanted you to develop confidence in your abilities before you knew the stakes," Robert explained. "Great designers need to trust their instincts completely. If you'd known that hundreds of people would experience your solutions daily, you might have second-guessed yourself." Sarah looked down at her notebook, seeing it with new eyes. These weren't just sketches anymore. They were blueprints for change, evidence of her ability to improve the world around her. The quiet girl who'd fixed a crooked sign was becoming someone who could transform entire spaces. "What happens now?" she asked. Robert smiled. "Now we discuss your future." The dismissive email from mall management arrived on a Tuesday morning, printed on standard office paper, but carrying the weight of institutional resistance. Sarah discovered it accidentally when she arrived for her weekly meeting with Robert, finding the document face up on his desk beside her project notebook. "Mr. Harrison," the email began, "we need to discuss your recent decision to involve an unqualified minor in operational assessments. Several store managers have expressed concerns about a teenage girl photographing their premises without proper credentials or supervision. Additionally, the marketing department questions whether a high school student possesses the expertise necessary to evaluate commercial retail environments." Sarah's hands trembled as she read the formal objections. The email continued with bureaucratic precision, questioning her presence during business hours, her lack of professional training, and the liability issues associated with her unofficial role. The final paragraph suggested that properly credentialed consultants should handle any design improvements. "I'm sorry you had to see that," Robert said, entering the office and immediately moving to turn the email face down. "I was hoping to address these concerns before they affected your work, but it was too late." Sarah had already absorbed every criticism, each one confirming her deepest fears about being unqualified and out of place. "They're right," she said quietly. "I don't have credentials. I don't have training. I'm just a kid who noticed a crooked sign." "That's not true," Robert replied firmly. "You have something that can't be taught in any school: genuine insight and natural talent." Sarah shook her head, backing toward the door. "I overheard Mrs. Peterson from the department store talking to her assistant yesterday. She said I was that girl who thinks she's an expert and wondered what I was really doing here." The weight of institutional skepticism was crushing. Sarah had spent weeks building confidence in her abilities, but the email stripped away her newfound assurance in minutes. She felt like an imposter, a child playing at being important while adults questioned her every move. "Maybe this was a mistake," she continued. "Maybe I should just go back to walking through the mall normally, not bothering anyone." Robert studied her face, recognizing the familiar pattern of self-doubt that had once paralyzed his own ambitions. "Do you know why I started with a failing bookstore instead of a successful business?" Sarah paused, curious despite her distress. "Because I was afraid of exactly what you're experiencing right now. I was afraid that people would see through me, that they'd realize I didn't know what I was doing." Robert moved to the window, looking out at the bustling mall below. "But here's what I learned. Expertise isn't about having all the answers immediately. It's about asking the right questions and being willing to learn." He turned back to Sarah. "Those managers questioning your qualifications? They've been walking past problems for years without noticing them. You've identified and documented dozens of improvement opportunities in just 3 weeks. Which one of you is really the expert?" Sarah felt her internal conflict intensifying. Part of her wanted to believe Robert's encouraging words, but another part was terrified of appearing foolish or presumptuous. "I need to think about this," she said finally. "I need to decide if I'm brave enough to continue when people are watching and judging." "That's exactly the kind of thoughtful consideration that makes you perfect for this work," Robert replied. "Take all the time you need." The original mall blueprint was yellowed with age and worn at the edges, but Robert handled it with the reverence of someone displaying a religious artifact. He'd spread it across the conference table in his office, weighing down the corners, with coffee mugs to keep it flat. To Sarah, it looked like a treasure map, complete with mysterious symbols and faded notations in Robert's younger handwriting. "This is where it all began," Robert said, his finger tracing the architectural lines. 1982. I was 33 years old and convinced I could revolutionize retail spaces." Sarah leaned closer, studying the blueprint's intricate details. She could see the original vision-wide corridors that encouraged leisurely strolling, strategically placed seating areas that invited conversation, and anchor stores positioned to draw shoppers through the entire complex. But she also noticed discrepancies between the original plan and the current reality. "The flower shop wasn't supposed to be there," she observed, pointing to a space that the blueprint designated as community gathering area. "Exactly," Robert smiled. "That's the difference between vision and reality. I learned that malls are living organisms. They evolve based on need, not just design." He began sharing stories that transformed the familiar retail space into something magical. The jewelry store had been the site of 17 marriage proposals that Robert knew about, probably dozens more that he didn't. The bookstore had hosted a weekly reading group for senior citizens for over a decade. The food court had been where 3 different charity drives had raised money for local families in crisis. "You see transactions," Robert said, "but I see relationships." Every successful retail space is actually a community center disguised as a commercial enterprise. Sarah's understanding of the mall began to shift. She'd always seen it as a collection of individual stores, but Robert was describing an interconnected ecosystem where each business contributed to the whole. The toy store drew young families, who then ate at the food court. The coffee shop provided a meeting place for the book club that purchased volumes from the bookstore. The hair salon's clients often browsed the boutique while waiting for appointments. "My first suggestion would be to improve the lighting in the north corridor," Sarah said, surprising herself with her boldness. "It's too dim, so people walk through quickly instead of stopping to look at the smaller shops." "Show me," Robert said, rolling up the blueprint. They walked through the mall together, Robert sharing more stories as they moved. He pointed out the corner where he'd convinced a young entrepreneur to open her first boutique, which had since grown into a regional chain. He showed her the spot where the mall's first art installation had been displayed, sparking a monthly program that featured local artists. The massage therapy place was originally a pet store, he mentioned as they passed the wellness center, but I noticed that stressed shoppers needed relaxation more than they needed puppies. Sarah found herself contributing observations and ideas throughout the tour. She suggested that the wide corridor near the department store could accommodate seasonal displays. She pointed out how moving the information kiosk 3 feet to the left would improve traffic flow. She noted that the children's play area could be expanded into the underutilized space adjacent to the family restroom. "You're not just seeing problems anymore," Robert observed. "You're seeing possibilities." Sarah realized he was right. The mall was becoming her canvas, and she was beginning to understand how to paint it. Sarah's handmade proposal portfolio was a work of art in itself, bound in deep blue cardstock, with her recommendations organized in clear plastic sleeves. Each page contained a photograph of a problem area, paired with a detailed sketch of her proposed solution, accompanied by hand-lettered explanations that demonstrated both her analytical thinking and her natural design sense. She'd spent the weekend preparing for this moment, driven by a determination that surprised even herself. The criticism from mall management had initially shaken her confidence, but Robert's faith in her abilities had rekindled something fiercer, a genuine belief that her observations mattered. The conference room felt impossibly large. As Sarah sat at the mahogany table, facing 5 skeptical adults, mall manager Patricia Wells sat directly across from her, flanked by the marketing director and 2 assistant managers. Robert occupied the chair to Sarah's right, his presence both comforting and intimidating. "Thank you for joining us today, Sarah," Patricia began, her tone professionally neutral. "Mr. Harrison has asked you to present your findings. Please proceed." Sarah's voice trembled slightly as she began, but it grew stronger with each observation. She opened her portfolio to the first page, which showed the confusing directional signage near the main entrance. This photograph shows how customers coming from the parking deck receive conflicting information about store locations, she explained, pointing to arrows that seemed to point in opposite directions. "My proposed solution involves creating a hierarchical system where primary destinations are indicated with larger, color-coded signs, while secondary locations use smaller, consistent typography." She flipped to the next page, her confidence building as she watched the adults lean forward to examine her work more closely. The detailed sketches spoke for themselves. Each proposal was thoroughly considered, practical and aesthetically pleasing. "The lighting in Sector 3 creates shadows that make the corridor feel unwelcoming," Sarah continued, her nervousness transforming into professional focus. "By repositioning the existing fixtures and adding 3 pendant lights, we can create a warmer atmosphere that encourages leisurely browsing." 15 minutes into the presentation, Sarah noticed that the skeptical expressions around the table had shifted to engaged interest. Marketing Director James Morrison asked detailed questions about her customer flow analysis. Assistant Manager Linda Chun requested clarification about her proposed wayfinding system. "This is impressive work," Patricia admitted as Sarah concluded her presentation. "Your observations about the food court seating arrangement are particularly insightful. We've received complaints about that area for months without understanding the root cause." Sarah felt a surge of validation. The current layout creates bottlenecks during peak hours because customers can't easily see available tables. By repositioning the planters and adjusting the seating angles, we can improve sight lines and reduce congestion. Robert had remained silent throughout the presentation, but his proud smile communicated more than words could convey. Sarah had transformed from a nervous teenager into a confident professional over the course of 30 minutes. "I have one final recommendation," Sarah said, turning to a page she'd added that morning. "I suggest implementing a monthly review system where small issues can be addressed before they become major problems. Sometimes the most expensive fixes are the ones we postpone." The room fell silent as the management team absorbed her comprehensive approach. These weren't just isolated suggestions. They represented a systematic philosophy for maintaining and improving the retail environment. "We'd like to implement several of your recommendations immediately," Patricia announced. "Consider this your first official project approval." The new store directory stood like a monument to Sarah's vision, its clean lines and logical organization transforming what had been a cluttered information board into an elegant wayfinding system. She'd redesigned the entire layout using a color-coded system that grouped stores by category: red for dining, blue for retail, green for services, with clear, readable fonts that could be seen from 20 feet away. Standing before her creation on its first day of operation, Sarah felt a mixture of pride and disbelief. 3 weeks earlier, she'd been an invisible teenager, walking through the mall unnoticed. Now she was watching strangers use her design to navigate their shopping experience more efficiently. "Excuse me," an elderly woman approached. "This new directory is wonderful. I found the pharmacy immediately, and I've been coming here for years without knowing where half these stores were located." Sarah smiled, her cheeks flushing with pleasure. "I'm glad it's helpful. "Did you design this?" the woman asked, noticing Sarah's obvious pride in the display. Yes, I did," Sarah replied, still adjusting to claiming credit for her work. The woman studied the directory more closely, then looked back at Sarah with impressed recognition. "You have real talent, young lady. This is professional quality work." Throughout the day, Sarah observed shoppers interacting with her design. She watched a mother with 3 children quickly locate the toy store using the color coding system. She saw a teenager find the cell phone repair shop without asking for directions. Most satisfying of all, she noticed that people were spending more time studying the directory, discovering stores they hadn't known existed. Store owners began approaching her with compliments and questions. The bookstore manager thanked her for the increased foot traffic since the new signage had been installed. The coffee shop owner mentioned that customers were finding his location more easily. Even the jewelry store proprietor, who'd been skeptical of her youth, admitted that her lighting recommendations had improved his display presentations. "This is just the beginning," Robert told her during their weekly meeting. "The mall board has approved funding for 5 more of your projects. They want to implement your food court redesign, the corridor lighting improvements, and the children's play area expansion." Sarah's notebook was filling with new assignments and opportunities. She'd been given a small office space, really just a converted storage room where she could work on designs and meet with contractors. The space contained a drafting table, proper lighting, and a phone with her own extension. "I've been thinking about your future," Robert continued. "Have you given any thought to college? To studying design professionally?" The question that had once seemed impossibly distant now felt urgent and achievable. Sarah's success with the mall projects had awakened ambitions she'd never dared to nurture. "I'd like to study architecture," she admitted, "but college costs money we don't have." "Let's talk about that," Robert said, his expression thoughtful. "I may have some ideas that could help." Sarah sensed that her life was about to change again, but this time the transformation didn't frighten her. She was ready for whatever came next. The local newspaper article was small, tucked between the weather forecast and the high school sports scores, but to Sarah it felt as significant as a front-page headline. The photograph showed her standing beside the new directory, her expression serious and professional beneath the caption, "Teen designer transforms local mall experience." Local high school student Sarah Chun has been quietly revolutionizing the shopping experience at Westfield Shopping Center. The article began, "Her innovative approach to wayfinding and space utilization has resulted in measurable improvements in customer satisfaction and store sales." Sarah read the article for the dozenth time, still unable to believe that her work warranted public attention. The reporter had interviewed several shoppers, all of whom praised the recent improvements. Store owners had provided testimonials about increased foot traffic and improved customer interactions. Even mall management had offered positive comments about her fresh perspective and practical solutions. Her grandmother Elina had carefully cut out the article and placed it in a frame on the kitchen table, where she could show it to neighbors and friends. "Mia, you're famous now," she'd said with tears in her eyes. "Your parents would be so proud." But fame, Sarah discovered, was a double-edged sword. The article had brought welcome validation, but it had also attracted unwanted attention. Classmates who'd never spoken to her before suddenly wanted to be friends. Teachers who'd barely noticed her now made pointed comments about her real-world experience. The comfortable anonymity she'd cultivated for years was evaporating. "I don't like people staring at me," she confided to Robert during their weekly meeting. "At school, everyone wants to know about my mall job. Some of them think I'm showing off. Others act like I'm some kind of celebrity. I just want to do the work." Robert understood her discomfort. Success always brings scrutiny. The question is, will you let other people's opinions change how you see yourself? Sarah considered this as she looked around her small office, now equipped with a computer and proper drafting software. Her latest project, redesigning the mall's promotional displays, was spread across her desk in various stages of completion. The work itself remained satisfying, but the external pressure was exhausting. "I've been offered 3 more projects," she said, showing Robert the formal requests from other Harrison Properties locations. "A shopping center in Richmond wants me to evaluate their customer flow patterns. A strip mall in Norfolk needs help with their parking lot signage. And there's a new development in Virginia Beach that wants input on their initial design." The opportunities were flattering and financially appealing, but Sarah felt overwhelmed by the sudden expansion of her responsibilities. She was still learning to manage her current projects while maintaining her grades and her part-time job at the frame shop. You don't have to accept everything, Robert advised. Quality work requires focus. It's better to do a few projects excellently than many projects adequately. Sarah nodded, appreciating his wisdom. She was learning that success brought choices, and choosing well was perhaps more important than choosing quickly. I want to keep working here, she said finally. This mall is where I learned to trust my instincts. I'm not ready to leave it behind. Robert smiled, understanding that true growth required both courage and patience. The college brochure for the Rhode Island School of Design felt substantial in Sarah's hands, its glossy pages filled with photographs of students working in bright studios and creating installations that seemed to pulse with creative energy. Robert had researched dozens of programs before presenting her with a carefully curated selection of design schools, each chosen for its emphasis on practical application and innovative thinking. Architecture programs are excellent, he'd explained during their meeting, but I think you'd thrive in an environment that combines spatial design with user experience. These programs teach you to think about how people interact with spaces, not just how to make them beautiful. Sarah flipped through the brochure, studying images of students designing everything from urban parks to retail environments. The work looked challenging and exciting, but also impossibly sophisticated compared to her current projects. Could she really compete with students who'd been preparing for design school their entire lives? The application deadlines are in 4 months, Robert continued, placing similar brochures from 5 other schools on the table. I've already spoken with admissions counselors at each program. Your portfolio of mall work is exactly the kind of real-world experience they're looking for. Sarah's dreams were expanding beyond the familiar boundaries of her small apartment and part-time job. She'd begun to imagine herself in design studios, collaborating with other creative minds, learning from professors who'd worked on major projects. But the financial reality remained daunting. In-state tuition at Virginia Tech is $15,000 per year, she said, reading from another brochure. Private schools like RISD cost twice that. Even with financial aid, I'd need to borrow money we can't afford to repay. Robert leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. What if I told you that financial concerns shouldn't influence your choice of program? That you should select the school that best matches your interests and abilities? Sarah looked up from the brochures, confused. I don't understand. I've been thinking about legacy, Robert said. About what happens to everything I've built when I'm no longer here to manage it. My children chose different careers. My business partners are competent but lack vision. I need someone who shares my fundamental belief that good design improves people's lives. Sarah sensed that the conversation was moving toward something significant, but she wasn't sure what Robert was suggesting. I've established a scholarship foundation, he continued. It provides full funding for students who demonstrate exceptional talent in practical design applications. A program covers tuition, living expenses, and materials for 4 years, with the expectation that recipients will work for Harrison Properties during summer breaks and consider full-time employment after graduation. Sarah stared at him, processing the implications. You're offering me a full scholarship? I'm offering you an investment in your future, Robert replied, and asking you to consider investing your future in the work we've started together. The college brochures suddenly felt different in her hands, not like distant dreams, but like immediate possibilities. Sarah's world was expanding again, and this time she felt ready to grow with it. The Harrison Foundation scholarship letter arrived on official letterhead, its formal language unable to disguise the magnitude of the opportunity it represented. Sarah read it 3 times before the words fully registered, her hands trembling as she absorbed the details of the most generous offer she'd ever received. The Harrison Foundation is pleased to offer you a full educational scholarship covering tuition, fees, housing, and educational materials for 4 years of undergraduate study at the accredited institution of your choice, the letter began. This award is renewable annually based on academic performance and continued interest in practical design applications. Sarah's grandmother, Elena, sat across from her at the kitchen table, watching her granddaughter's face cycle through disbelief, joy, and overwhelming gratitude. "What does it mean, Mia?" "It means college is free," Sarah whispered, still staring at the letter. "Everything. Tuition, room and board, books, supplies. For 4 years." Elena's eyes filled with tears. In all her years of working multiple jobs to support Sarah's education, she'd never imagined that such an opportunity could exist. "Mr. Harrison did this?" Sarah nodded, reading the letter's additional details. The scholarship included summer internships with Harrison Properties, mentorship opportunities with design professionals, and a guaranteed job interview upon graduation. But most important, it required no immediate repayment, just a commitment to excellence and a willingness to consider a career in commercial design. "There's more," Sarah said, flipping to the second page. "The foundation will also provide a monthly stipend for personal expenses and transportation, and they'll match any money I earn from part-time work up to $2,000 per year." The generosity was almost incomprehensible. Sarah had grown up understanding that opportunities like college required sacrifice, struggle, and years of debt repayment. This scholarship eliminated all those barriers, transforming her future from a distant possibility into an immediate reality. "Why would he do this?" Elena asked, her voice filled with wonder. Sarah thought about her months of working with Robert, their conversations about potential and legacy, his stories about recognizing talent in unexpected places. "I think he sees something in me that I'm still learning to see in myself." The letter concluded with practical next steps: application, deadlines, required documentation, and contact information for the Foundation's educational coordinator. Sarah would need to maintain a 3.5 GPA, submit annual progress reports, and participate in summer internship programs. The expectations were high, but entirely achievable. "I need to call him," Sarah said, reaching for the phone. "I need to thank him properly." "No," Elena said gently. "First, you need to understand what this means. This man is investing in your future because he believes you can change the world through design. That's not something you thank someone for with words." Sarah looked at her grandmother, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You're right. I need to earn this. I need to prove that his faith in me was justified." "Now you're thinking like the woman I raised you to be," Elena smiled. "Now you're ready to succeed." The acceptance letter from Virginia Tech's School of Architecture and Urban Studies was printed on heavy paper with an embossed seal that made the opportunity feel official and intimidating. Sarah had been accepted to all 6 programs she'd applied. T.O. But this particular letter represented her final choice, a respected program close enough to home for weekend visits, but far enough away to foster independence. "Dear Sarah Chun," the letter began, "we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted into our Bachelor of Architecture program. Your portfolio of practical design work and your demonstrated ability to solve real-world spatial problems make you exactly the kind of student we seek." Sarah had submitted her mall projects as the centerpiece of her application portfolio, uncertain whether academic reviewers would value her commercial work. The acceptance letter's specific mention of her practical design experience confirmed that her unconventional background was actually an advantage. "You'll be one of the youngest students in the program," Robert noted as they discussed her college preparations. "Most architecture students enter with 4 years of art classes and design theory. You're entering with 2 years of implemented solutions and client feedback." The distinction was important. While other students would be learning to think like designers, Sarah would be learning to think like a professional designer. Her mall experience had taught her that successful design required understanding user behavior, budget constraints, and implementation logistic skills that many students wouldn't develop until graduate school. But the transition wouldn't be without challenges. Sarah's high school guidance counselor had warned her about the intensity of architecture programs, the long hours in studio, and the competitive atmosphere among students. The workload would be significantly heavier than anything she'd experienced. "I'm worried about fitting in," Sarah admitted during her final meeting with Robert before leaving for college. "Most of my classmates probably come from families with money and connections. They've been preparing for this their whole lives." Robert understood her concerns. "When I started my first business, I was surrounded by people who seemed more qualified, more connected, more confident. But I had something they didn't. I had hunger. I had a reason to succeed beyond just personal achievement. He gestured toward the mall, visible through his office window. You're not going to college just to get a degree. You're going to develop skills that will help you improve people's lives through design. That sense of purpose will carry you through the difficult moments. Sarah's acceptance letter included information about her assigned roommate, a girl from Northern Virginia who'd attended an arts-focused high school. The dining hall options, campus resources, and orientation schedule all seemed designed to help students transition smoothly into college life. I'll miss working here, Sarah said, looking around the small office that had become her creative sanctuary. This place taught me that I actually had something valuable to contribute. You'll be back, Robert replied confidently, for summer internships, for holiday breaks, and eventually for your career. This mall will always be here, but you need to grow beyond it before you can truly transform it. Sarah nodded, understanding that leaving was the next step in her journey toward becoming the designer she was meant to be. The handmade thank you card was Sarah's masterpiece of gratitude, featuring a detailed pen and ink drawing of the mall from an aerial perspective, with tiny figures of shoppers moving through the spaces she'd helped improve. Inside, her careful script read, "Thank you for seeing potential in a quiet girl who fixed a crooked sign. You changed my life by teaching me that small gestures can have enormous consequences." The card's cover also included a small, precisely drawn timeline showing her journey from invisible teenager to scholarship recipient, with key moments illustrated in miniature: the crooked Barnes and Noble sign, the Polaroid camera, her first presentation, and finally, her acceptance letter to Virginia Tech. "This is beautiful work," Robert said, examining the card's intricate details. "You've documented our entire collaboration in a single image." They were sitting in the mall's food court, which had been transformed according to Sarah's final design recommendations. The new lighting created a warm, inviting atmosphere. The reconfigured seating arrangements improved traffic flow, and the updated signage helped customers navigate the space more efficiently. It was a fitting location for their farewell celebration. Mall employees had gathered to wish Sarah well, a group that included store managers, maintenance staff, security guards, and several shoppers who'd become familiar faces during her 2 years of work. Someone had arranged for a cake from the bakery, and the jewelry store owner had contributed a small gift, a silver pendant shaped like a compass. "For when you need to find your way," Mrs. Rodriguez explained, fastening the necklace around Sarah's neck, "though I suspect you'll always know which direction to go." Sarah's grandmother, Elena, sat beside her, radiating pride and barely contained emotion. She'd watched her granddaughter transform from a shy, worried teenager into a confident young woman with clear goals and unlimited potential. The scholarship had removed financial barriers, but Elena knew that Sarah's success would ultimately depend on her character and determination. "I want you to remember something," Robert said, addressing the small gathering. Sarah didn't become talented when she received a scholarship or when she was accepted to college. She was talented when she fixed that first crooked sign. Education will refine her skills, but her instincts and her character, those were always there. He turned to Sarah directly. "Don't let anyone at college convince you that practical experience is less valuable than theoretical knowledge. You've already solved real problems for real people. That's the foundation everything else will build upon." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the support surrounding her. These people, most of whom she'd met through her work at the mall, had become her professional family. They'd watched her grow, encouraged her development, and celebrated her achievements. "I'll stay in touch," she promised, meaning it completely. "And I'll be back for summer internships. This place will always be special to me because it's where I learned to believe in myself." As the gathering dispersed, Sarah took one final walk through the mall, noting all the changes that bore her influence. Tomorrow she would begin college, but tonight she was simply grateful for the journey that had brought her this far. Sarah's design portfolio from college was a testament to 4 years of intensive learning and creative growth, its pages documenting her evolution from a talented observer to a skilled professional designer. The portfolio opened with her freshman year project's basic exercises in form and function. It showed promise, but lacked sophistication. By senior year, her work displayed the confidence and technical skill of someone ready to tackle complex commercial projects. Her thesis project had been particularly meaningful, a comprehensive redesign of small-town shopping centers, with Westfield Mall serving as her primary case study. The project analyzed how thoughtful design could revitalize struggling retail spaces and strengthen community connections. Her professors had praised the work's practical insights and real-world applications. This isn't typical academic work, her advisor had noted during her final presentation. You're not just proposing theoretical solutions, you're demonstrating proven strategies based on actual implementation and user feedback. Throughout college, Sarah had maintained her connection with Robert through weekly phone calls and detailed letters describing her coursework, her challenges, and her evolving understanding of design principles. He'd visited campus twice each year, taking her to dinner and discussing how her education was preparing her for larger responsibilities. Her summer internships with Harrison Properties had become increasingly sophisticated. The first year, she'd worked on signage updates and minor space improvements. By her senior year, she was leading teams of contractors and presenting renovation proposals to property investors. Her colleagues treated her as a peer, not as a student. Earning experience. You've developed something that can't be taught, Robert had observed during her final internship. You have the rare ability to see spaces from multiple perspectives simultaneously, as a designer, as a user, as a business owner, and as a community member. Sarah's college experience had been exactly what she'd needed. The rigorous coursework had given her theoretical foundations to support her intuitive insights. Studio critiques had taught her to defend her design decisions with evidence and analysis. Collaborative projects had shown her how to work effectively with other creative professionals. She'd graduated summa cum laude with job offers from 3 prestigious architecture firms and an open invitation to continue her education in graduate school. But the most meaningful recognition had come from her thesis committee's recommendation that her shopping center research be published in a professional design journal. The work represents a significant contribution to the field of commercial space design, the committee had written. Ms. Chun's integration of user experience data with aesthetic principles offers valuable insights for practicing architects and urban planners. Now, holding her completed portfolio and her diploma, Sarah felt ready to make the next crucial decision about her future. She had opportunities to join established firms and work on high-profile projects, but she also had Robert's standing offer to return to Harrison Properties as a senior designer. The choice would determine not just her immediate career path, but her long-term impact on the field of commercial design. Sarah knew exactly what she wanted to do. Sarah's business cards read, Senior Mall Design Consultant, in elegant, understated lettering that reflected her new professional status. The cards were printed on the same heavy cream stock that Robert used, symbolizing her transition from student to equal partner in the Harrison Properties vision. Her first major project was both thrilling and terrifying, a complete redesign of the original Westfield Mall, the place where her career had begun 6 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was returning to transform the space that had originally transformed her. This is your opportunity to implement everything you've learned, Robert had said when offering her the assignment. But more importantly, it's your chance to show other designers what's possible when you truly understand user needs. Sarah approached the project with the systematic methodology she developed in college, but also with the intuitive understanding that came from years of observing how people actually used retail spaces. She conducted extensive user research, analyzing traffic patterns, shopping behaviors, and customer feedback to identify opportunities for improvement. The mall had aged during her college years. Several anchor stores had closed, foot traffic had declined, and the space felt tired despite regular maintenance. Sarah's redesign would need to address both aesthetic and functional challenges while respecting the building's architectural heritage. Her proposal was comprehensive, expanded natural lighting through redesigned skylights, flexible retail spaces that could accommodate different store sizes, improved accessibility features, and technology integration that enhanced rather than dominated the shopping experience. The centerpiece was a community gathering space that could host events, art installations, and local vendor markets. "You're not just renovating a mall," Robert observed as he reviewed her plans. "You're creating a community hub that happens to include retail spaces." Sarah had learned to think beyond immediate commercial applications. Her college education had taught her about sustainable design principles, universal accessibility, and the social impact of built environments. The new Westfield Mall would serve as a model for how commercial spaces could support community well-being. The project team included architects, contractors, and technology specialists, but Sarah was the lead designer, responsible for ensuring that all elements worked together cohesively. She was no longer the teenage observer documenting problems. She was the professional charged with solving them. "Working with Sarah is like working with someone who has X-ray vision," one of the contractors told Robert. "She sees potential problems and opportunities that the rest of us miss completely." The renovation would take 18 months to complete, but Sarah's preliminary designs had already attracted attention from the architectural press. A major design magazine had requested an interview about her approach to retail space planning, and several other mall owners had contacted Harrison Properties about similar projects. Sarah Chun was becoming exactly what Robert had envisioned years earlier, a designer who understood that the smallest details could have the largest impact on people's daily experiences. Her journey from invisible teenager to recognized professional was nearing its most significant milestone. The new mall sign was modest in size but profound in significance. Its small bronze plaque reading "Lead Designer, Sarah Chun" in the same elegant font used throughout the renovated space. The plaque was positioned near the main entrance, where thousands of visitors would pass it daily, creating a permanent record of her transformation from invisible teenager to accomplished professional. The mall's reopening ceremony drew hundreds of people, including local officials, business leaders, and community members who'd watched the 18-month renovation with curious anticipation. Sarah stood at the podium, looking out at faces that included her grandmother Elena, her college professors, former classmates, and the mall employees who'd supported her journey from the beginning. 6 years ago, I was a shy high school student who fixed a crooked sign because disorder bothered me, Sarah began, her voice carrying the confidence that comes from years of proven success. "I never imagined that simple gesture would lead to this moment." She gestured toward the transformed space around them, where natural light streamed through redesigned skylights, illuminating wide corridors that encouraged both efficient navigation and leisurely exploration. The new community gathering space buzzed with conversations between neighbors who'd rediscovered the mall as a social destination. "This renovation represents more than architectural improvement," Sarah continued. "It demonstrates what happens when we pay attention to details that others might overlook, when we believe that small gestures can have enormous consequences." Robert sat in the front row, his expression reflecting the pride of a mentor watching his protege achieve her full potential. At 79, he was beginning to step back from daily operations, confident that Sarah and her team could carry forward the vision he'd spent decades developing. "The most important lesson I've learned is that good design isn't about creating something beautiful for its own sake," Sarah said. "It's about improving people's daily experiences in ways they might never consciously notice, but will always appreciate." After the ceremony, Sarah walked through the mall with her grandmother, pointing out features that reflected her design philosophy. The wider corridors accommodated wheelchairs and strollers more easily. The improved lighting reduced eye strain and created a more welcoming atmosphere. The redesigned seating areas encouraged social interaction while providing comfortable spaces for rest. "You've created something that will serve people for decades," Elena observed, her voice filled with wonder at her granddaughter's accomplishment. But Sarah's greatest satisfaction came from watching a young maintenance worker straighten a display that had been knocked askew by shoppers. The employee's careful attention to detail reminded Sarah of her own compulsive need to fix small problems, suggesting that her influence was already inspiring others to care about their environment. The cycle was continuing. Somewhere in the renovated mall, another observant teenager was probably noticing things that could be improved, developing the same instincts that had launched Sarah's career. The difference was that now Sarah was positioned to recognize and nurture that potential, ensuring that the next generation of designers would have the support and opportunities she'd been fortunate to receive. The crooked sign had been straightened, but its impact would last forever.